Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Wednesday morning. Uh, Technically, the Constitution is still in place. Still a constitutional democracy, I believe. But your mileage may vary.
Yeah, man, I'm reading this book. I'm hoping to have this author on. It's a new. He's a historian. He's written a lot about Hitler, and there's a new book, and it doesn't. I don't think the words Donald Trump are mentioned in the book, but each chapter is a different way that Hitler was able to seize control. So, like one chapter will be on taming the elites. One chapter will be on, co-opting the media. One chapter will be on you know skirting the rule of law and the judiciary, like stuff like that. And
Mhm.
so I was starting to freak out last night. Actually, I had to
I mean, is this an
like
author offering a how-to so people can be their own authoritarian, or is he trying to get people to stop authoritarians?
no, I think the purpose is to serve as a warning bell. Not it's not how to be a dictator. Although, frankly, I mean, it's very similar. You could read this book and follow his steps for evil purposes, or you could read it and be like, wow, this is a big warning sign, we need to do something. So anyway, we'll see if I can get him on. Stay tuned for that. But it's a little bit scary reading, not because I mean, look, I think the Hitler thing is obviously Hitler's uniquely evil. He murdered 6 million Jews and started World War II and all that. Like, I don't think Donald Trump's going to do those things, but I do think he's using some of the same techniques that most famously Hitler, and I'm sure a lot of other authoritarian leaders, did to consolidate power and to become authoritarian. So yeah, dicey.
I mean, I think what we're learning is, I mean, Hitler or Stalin may be of orders of magnitude murderous authoritarians. Hard to equate anybody with people of that degree of evil, but the techniques one uses to become an authoritarian, even if your end goals aren't as genocidal, are still disturbing, and you're seeing them being used not just by Trump but by Putin or by Orban or uh, in Turkey, Erdogan. I mean, there's lots of and lots of wannabes in Germany and France and other
Yeah.
places.
Yeah, and
So
so like one of them is take over, the military with your loyalists. People who are going to be more loyal to you than to the Constitution. One of them is to take over the media, because you can't really have people. Well, that hasn't happened, but certainly we've seen some media be tamed. So partly the media's changed. So you have alternate media like Fox News, which is basically a house organ. And then partly you have mainstream outlets who have caved in several prominent occasions of late. So yeah, there's a how to be a dictator playbook, and yeah, he's going down the list, it seems.
I don't know if this is evidence of uh, evil genius on Trump's part, but I am struck by the obsession with the Kennedy Center. I mean, I don't think it's really good politics for him. I mean, the biggest trouble that Trump is giving to himself, and I think the Republican Party, is he's doing 10,000 things of seemingly forceful, radical nature, and none of them involve lowering the price of goods for the average American, which is the thing that people wanted him to do the most. So he's very vulnerable to the charge of you're looking out for yourself and not for me. And you could say in terms of immigration, as horrible as some of the stuff he's doing in regards to deportation without due process, there is some poll evidence that people wanted a tougher line on immigration, so you could politically justify it. I can't imagine the average American is saying, "Why are you going to the Kennedy Center board
Yeah.
meeting when the price of eggs is $10 a dozen. That doesn't make any sense.
Obviously, the election was primarily about the economy, I think inflation. And if Donald Trump were really focused on things like bringing down prices, then that would probably be smarter. Yeah, I mean, I think that the saving grace for Trump would be if he were to win the midterms, Republicans were to win the midterms, hold the House and the Senate for another 2 years, lock in even more institutions and policies in place, and erode more norms. That would be very, I think, dangerous. But Trump's policies actually instead seem to be exacerbating inflation and hurting the economy. Why is he focused on the Kennedy Center? That's a good question. I mean, I do think there's something to be said from the fact that politics is downstream from culture, and if you can actually control the culture, then that's a lot of power. But I'm just not sure that the Kennedy Center has much real cachet to the average person. So I assume this is more of a vanity project than anything else. What do you think?
Well, that's what. I think it's kind of both. They may have told themselves that if we take over the Kennedy Center, this is going to help with the cultural project. But I would agree with you. Like the ability for the Kennedy Center to really dictate culture is extraordinarily limited. But overall, it's the whole ethos seems to be seize all the power that you can, dominate every nook and cranny of government possible. And I mean, maybe to some degree, this is even not just next. I don't think Trump really thinks 3 steps ahead, but others are thinking if we can get rid of as many people in the civil service as possible and embed MAGAites there, then we're going to have power, for years to come. But I'm not so optimistic about humanity to believe that wouldn't be effective so long as you are delivering for the public in some noticeable way. And everything so far is going in the opposite direction, where you're destabilizing the economy, you're increasing uncertainty. And my guess is they think they're going to be able to blunt that or turn around with a big tax cut. The big tax cut is coming, and that's going to be the big deliverable. And I just don't think a big tax cut is going to offset broader destabilization of the macroeconomy.
I think even more effective is if you can actually send people checks, like the DOGE check or whatever. I think getting a check in the mail, like Americans got checks in the mail last time from Trump, COVID, that he personally signed, not personally signed, but that an auto pen signed or something that looked like his signature.
But it depends on the purchasing power. If prices are going through the roof or jobs are being lost, I don't think the check makes up for that.
Yeah. No, it depends. I think the check goes a long way psychologically and it makes people feel good, even if their purchasing power. But at a certain point, it's untenable. So where do you want to start? We've got a few topics, a few crazy things happening. I don't know what the segue is here, Bill. What is the closest topic to our opening rant?
I don't know about clean segue, but I've certainly written the most about what's going on the Democratic side of things.
Okay.
On the fallout from Schumer waving through the bill to keep the government open. And I'm definitely I would have filibustered in his position. I would have drawn a line at, I will negotiate a bill with you. I'll even accept some spending cuts, but the numbers in this bill have to be accepted by the president. We need language in here that says you have to spend this money. Otherwise, what are we talking about here? If we're going to give Trump an unconstitutional and illegal line item veto, so it's already been adjudicated before the Supreme Court, then we can't be.
So you would have had the fight, because I don't think Trump
on that narrow ground.
Okay.
That narrow ground. Like
I don't
it
think
was
they're
not.
going to
It
give
wouldn't
in
be.
on.
It wouldn't be an excuse just to have a shutdown for the fun of it.
Sure, sure. Okay. Gaming that out, I don't think Trump or Republicans would back down on that. And so there would have been a shutdown. And then, so, the problems of the shutdown are number one, I think Democrats very likely could have gotten blamed because effectively they would have been filibustering. So they weren't just sitting back saying, hey, Republicans didn't have the Democrats would have been proactively doing something to shut down government. So I think they would have possibly been blamed. Also, there was an argument that if you shut down the government, that that allows DOGE to basically wreak even more havoc and make some of the jobs that you shut down go away indefinitely.
Well, I think the latter is the best argument that Schumer had. So I said what I said, but I'm not of the mindset that Chuck Schumer is a surrender monkey that needs to be tossed overboard. It was not a cut and dry political calculation. I think Democrats could have won the blame game argument so long as they weren't making unreasonable demands. They weren't like bringing in ideological wish list items. But I grant that it still might have been it still might have gone the other way. And there's that big risk. Are you playing into Elon Musk's hands? When he then, because the federal government, the executive branch would then decree this employee is essential, this employee is non-essential, all you non-essentials go home. And then after the shutdown drama is over, Musk decrees, well, all you non-essentials, you're non-essential, you don't come back.
We didn't say
maybe,
it.
Maybe that gets litigated in the courts for some time, but that's the whole kick the can down the road game that they're playing. They act first and litigate later. So Schumer was not unreasonable.
The other problem, Bill, real quick, is I think that, look, there was a sense that Trump had a lot of bad news happening at that point. Trump was getting a lot of negative feedback for the stock market, for example, and Wall Street. And why would you want to step on that? And then if the economy does tank, you give Trump an excuse. He could say, hey, the Democrats shut down the government. The economy was great, though the stock market was awesome, but Democrats shut down the government. So it would muddy the water rather than being able to completely claim, hey, Donald Trump controls everything. He owns this.
Those are all legitimate risks that Schumer had to consider. And that's why he shouldn't be hung in effigy for making the decision. He had the notion that he has somehow allowed Trump to do whatever he wants. Like the blame for what Trump is doing falls on Trump. Don't get angry at Schumer because he got put into a very difficult position. And the one thing that I think has made his job harder to explain himself is the fact that the Democrats, and this is both true for Schumer and Jeffries, they were a little cagey what their end game was as they waited to see what the House did. I think they had a certain degree of hope that House Republicans would not be able to pass their own bill.
Yes.
And in that circumstance, then they'd have a lot more leverage.
Yes. Because I think if the House doesn't pass the bill, Democrats have no obligation in the House to bail out Republicans.
Right.
But in the Senate, it's harder because the threshold is 60. And so in order, Democrats can't just keep their hands clean. They would have to proactively be involved in shutting down the government. That's the problem, I think. So I don't blame Schumer. Look, I think Schumer is a human shrug. I don't think he's suited to this role anymore. So I am with, the Democrats who want new blood and someone younger and more vigorous. Having said that, it's like the Democrats don't have any power. They don't have a lot of options. And so you would have to be a really compelling, charismatic leader to look strong and look good in a scenario where you actually don't have a lot of options. You don't have a lot of cards to play if you're Chuck Schumer.
I don't think it's fair to call Schumer sort of past his prime. I mean, he did plenty of good work in the last several years. I mean, this is just a judgment call. It's not a question of like age or competency. He made a judgment call, and he had to, and he
I
had to
agree on
recalibrate the
this one.
strategy. What's that?
On this specific case, I agree with you. I think that the questions about Schumer transcend this. But yes, on this case, I think Schumer actually did the right thing in this case.
And he had to make a strategic judgment after the House passed its bill, and now you're facing a unified Republican Party, not a divided Republican Party. That made the job even harder. Now, if they had sort of more clearly articulated a set of guidelines, set of principles ahead of that, and they stuck to, then people might have got it better. But because they were kind of hanging back, playing a little wait and see, and then they had to kind of scramble after that move, that was a little disorienting for people and sort of made Schumer a bit more vulnerable. But it's just they're in a difficult spot because they don't have much inherent power, and Trump is doing all sorts of very horrible things that are not easily blunted by either the legislative or the judicial branch. So get mad at Trump about that, not Schumer.
Mm-hmm. My last reference to the book I'm reading, but man, the opposition parties, the Social Democrats, this is before Hitler seizes complete control. They are so inept, and at a certain point, like they're not even allowed to attend certain meetings. It's like they're so tamed. And honestly, it is reminiscent of what's happening right now. I mean, Schumer thinks, I heard, Schumer said something to the effect of, well, we've been here before. When George W. Bush won re-election, it looked like Democrats were down and out, and like, I'm not sure that's a great analogy. I get the point. Parties have been in the wilderness before. Political, fortunes change quickly. But this is also very different in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with the point he's making, because I think Democrats are going to have a good 2026 the way things are going.
Mm-hmm.
But he, like, that's a bit of a tin ear moment, because so much of people's revulsion is the legitimate sense that this is not like the others. This is a very different set of circumstances. Trump is behaving in a far more egregious way than any president before him. And so just to put everything in the terms of historical perspective is going to seem out of touch. So I do think he has to be careful about those sorts of analogies.
You mentioned 2026. I mean, a lot of indicators would suggest that Democrats will have a good year. Historically, the out party does great in midterms. Donald Trump is doing a lot of crazy things now. I think if Elon Musk is still around, you run against Musk, because I think he's even less popular, and the DOGE things are even less popular. And I clearly think Democrats are poised to take the House, which will give them the ability to get some things done, or to do some things, to block some things. The Senate, I know last week Bill, you talked about how Roy Cooper may run against Tom Tillis in North Carolina. Yeah. That could be a pickup. But then I think later that day, Jeanne Shaheen or somebody announced a retirement. Another, I think the third incumbent Democrat who's up in 26 announced a retirement.
Because Peters in Michigan retired, and Tina Smith in Minnesota.
Who were the three?
Tina Smith, Minnesota; Gary Peters, Michigan; Shaheen, New Hampshire. I think those are the main ones right now.
So, I mean, do you think Dems... So right now, Republicans have 53 seats in the Senate plus the vice president. Tiebreaker. I'm sorry, Republicans. Did I say Republicans? Republicans have 53 seats in the Senate plus the tiebreaker. Do you think Dems have a chance to take back the Senate?
I mean, that's a tall order. I mean, the map is not great for Democrats. So you only have, so they got to now hold Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire without having incumbents, which I think they could do, particularly if in a midterm that's likely to be swinging in their direction. But they're not layups. And so you have two blue-purple options, Tillis in North Carolina and Susan Collins in Maine. And Susan Collins has been a tough customer to beat before, but, at some point luck runs out. Take John Tester in Montana, for example. This could be the kind of year where Susan Collins, runs out of, magic tricks.
So now you're at 49, right?
Exactly.
49 seats.
And after that, it would have to be a kind of tsunami.
When you say Democrats are poised to have a really good 2026, kind of the best case scenario is they pick up the House, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The House really should be a gimme. The average pickup for an out party is something like 20 seats. They only need 5. Like it would be an embarrassment if they did not take back the House. The Senate, though, is much more difficult. It would have to be a true wave year. I mean, I don't discount it. Waves happen, but the level of polarization that we have would argue against, even a significant wave might still be tough to crack what has been a true red state or even like a light red state,
Right.
because the degree of the pendulum swing just have not been as wide in recent years.
Bill, you had you had a piece talking about Chuck Schumer and talking about all this stuff and the Democrats, and there was a big fight over the not a big fight, but there's been some fighting over the filibuster. Former Senator Kirsten Sinema taking some shots at Democrats like AOC who in the past wanted to get rid of the filibuster and now are complaining that Democrats aren't using the filibuster. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, not that, being on the side of Sinema automatically, gives you credibility, but I think Sinema has the better argument here. AOC talked about Democrats who say we should keep the filibuster that don't use it. Literally not a single person in the Senate that voted for cloture on the Democratic side are people that argued for keeping the filibuster. These are all people. So there was a vote in 2021 to suspend the filibuster in order to get voting rights legislation passed. And it was only Sinema and Manchin that bolted. The rest of the Democrats were for it. And Sinema and Manchin aren't in the Senate anymore. So, and 9 of the 10 Democrats, including Schumer, who voted for cloture, who were in the Senate at that time, and they voted to suspend the filibuster for voting rights. So these aren't, in AOC's standard, these aren't hypocrites. So the criticism is misdirected. There's a broader point. You can say, well, don't be nitpicky about it. There's a broader point that Democrats writ large don't use it when they need to. And so we've already had 3 other examples where Democrats did filibuster since Trump has come back in office, and not for easy bills. So you had a bill that was going to ban schools for allowing transgender women to play on girls' sports teams, or they would lose federal funding. Democrats filibustered that. There's one about involving doctors and late-term abortions, where I don't think Republicans argued this, but Democrats saying this could be interpreted to criminalize doctors that perform late-term abortions. They filibustered that. And there was one about sanctioning the International Criminal Court for their arrest warrant of Bibi Netanyahu. So these are all things that Republicans could potentially use against them in the midterms, but Democrats filibustered. And then even more broadly than that, I mean, the whole argument about the filibuster is that you don't even have to actively filibuster for it to have an impact. The era of the silent filibuster that does not require you to talk and talk and talk means that plenty of bills just don't even get to the floor because the majority party says, I don't got 60 for this, forget it. I'm not even going to bother with it.
But the other option's true too, though, right, Bill? Like this may be a good criticism of Schumer and why Democrats need some new blood. Like, couldn't they have done a filibuster without shutting down the government? They could have gotten attention by like staying there all night, talking about how bad the problems are and how this is not fair. Like isn't it possible that a skilled communicator could have gotten the benefit or the attention from filibustering without looking weak when they back down
but you still have to climb down. I mean, there was a deadline of the 14th to keep the government open. They would have just been attacked for being performative and then
Okay.
caving anyway. So, Schumer did that a little bit because he gave a floor statement that sounded like they were about to fight, although if you read it closely, it left for a lot of wiggle room. And then he climbed down 24 hours later. And look, I think there's a little bit of it. If you do want to kind of knock Schumer's tendencies, there's another example of that, which is in 2018, January 2018, where Schumer, along with, I think it's mainly Schumer, instigated a shutdown over the plight of the Dreamers, and climbed down 3 days later.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were able to really save the Dreamers through other means. And I wrote about this at the time, that this was a needless fight to pick. You could win this battle in the courts, which they did, at least well enough to kick the can down the road and keep the Dreamers in the country. And so Schumer did like a little bit of fighting to kind of appease the base, but really didn't have the numbers to sustain it. And so it came and went pretty quick. And they were able to escape a lot of complaining from Democrats because they were able to save the Dreamers through other means. So I think Schumer has a tendency to handle these things inelegantly. But on the whole, he's been pretty. He doesn't roll over on a chronic basis. There's plenty of fights that he picks and sticks to his guns.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember when there was a narrative on the right that Chuck Schumer was this brilliant Machiavellian player, and he was like rolling Marco Rubio and Republicans. You couldn't keep up with Schumer, and now I think the perception is he's a total schlemiel, he doesn't seem to be the right man for the moment, and I do suspect that at a certain point Democrats are going to have to turn the page, but not today.
There are people that thought Harry Reid was milquetoast until
Harry Reid would cut you. He would slit your throat.
People say that now, but earlier on he was thought to be way too timid, no presence whatsoever. Had a record of moderation in his voting record. He was touting Harriet Miers, and people were mad at him that he was like, why is he getting behind Bush's Supreme Court pick? And it wasn't until, Sam Alito ended up supplanting her that people realized that was the right call. And Pelosi was called dead weight for a long time. And there are plenty of people on the left that thought she sold them out on various things. So they all have their ups and downs. And so I would not be surprised if Schumer gets reassessed more than once between now and the end of his career.
Well, he's in a tough spot because number one, he's up against Trump and the chaos, and it's just quantitatively very different as well. But also, I mean, look, it's herding cats these days. I mean, it used to be that if you were the Senate minority leader, you had a lot of power over your caucus, and now backbenchers can run to TV cameras or just Twitter, TikTok, and mock you. Didn't used to be that way. Bill, I want to give you credit. You have not asked me what I'm hearing from the conservative movement or West Virginia, but I did text you last week.
Yeah,
I texted you this weekend because Friday night I'm sitting in a church auditorium watching my kids play a basketball game, and I'm minding my own business, and I overhear two women talking, and the one woman says, talking about her husband, and she says, DOGE is coming for his job. We would cash in his 401k, but it's in the, it's crashed or whatever. So that's totally anecdotal, but Bill, we are hearing these anecdotal stories. There's a guy named Bradley Bartell, a Wisconsin man who voted for Trump, who was shocked when his Peruvian wife was detained by ICE at an airport. No word yet if she's going to be deported. There's a guy named David Pasquino, a vet who worked for Veteran Affairs, who was fired. He now feels betrayed And I mentioned this woman, Jennifer Pigott, Piggott, who proudly flew a Trump campaign flag outside her West Virginia home, who was abruptly fired from her job in the Treasury Department. So we're starting to hear stories of Trump voters who have been fired or had a loved one deported. I've talked before, I've certainly written about this before, that and unless Trump sends them another big check, farmers could be in trouble with the tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs that would be imposed on their exports, which would hit a lot of red state Trump voters. Does this matter?
Well, I think it does matter. I think if real people are being hurt, real people who voted for Trump are being hurt, that is going to have an impact. You got a lot of Ron Swansons out there. You feel that the federal government is all just a bunch of hippies, but there are plenty who work in the federal government who are just, average Joes, collecting a paycheck, and didn't think that they would be the ones on the firing line if Trump got into office, or people who are tied to immigrants and their families, and like, well, he's going after the criminal immigrants, not going to go after my wife or my uncle or whatever. There's a USA Today story about the woman who got detained after she and her husband or fiance came back from a trip to Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And what the story mentioned was it's harder to catch an undocumented immigrant with a criminal record. You have to, they're on the run. They're actively trying to hide, and so it can take 6 agents to get one criminal, but you can camp out at the airport. Yeah. And check the flight registry and see whose visas expired or whatever.
Right. And this woman that I'm talking about, I don't know if we're talking about the same woman. The woman I'm talking about was coming back from Peru.
Peru, sorry.
Her husband voted for Trump. She is married to an American citizen. Mm. She is a green card holder. And as far as I know, she was not leading pro-Hamas rallies at Columbia University. And even if she doesn't get deported, apparently they've already spent tens of thousands of dollars or something. The money that they were going to spend on their honeymoon and their, I think I read that. Maybe it was a first house, whatever. A lot of money just in like legal fees. And I mean, I don't know if you've seen this. So the New York Times, The Daily podcast had a report a couple weeks ago about, there was like a woman who came to America from Iran, who was a Christian fleeing persecution in Iran. And she was rounded up and sent to Colombia, or I forget what, some other country, and held in a hotel and then transported to basically what sounds to me like a concentration camp. I have no idea what happened to her. But now we're seeing these Venezuelans, right? They were, I think, arrested. They were being detained. But were they actually all gang members? Apparently one of them maybe wasn't. He was like a musician who just happened to have tattoos that looked incriminating. And they have been, had their heads shaved. They were sent to El Salvador, I think, being held in. Have you seen this, Bill?
I heard about it.
And there was a judge tried to stop this from happening.
Yes.
And they were like, oh, too late. The planes are already over international water, something like that.
Well, this is the case that is now the biggest risk of triggering a true constitutional crisis, because you have the White House flagrantly ignoring a judicial order and saying the judge doesn't have power here. Now, let's presumably this will go up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's rules on the side of the judiciary, the lower courts. Then we'll see what Trump does, and we'll see how severe the situation is. And I really don't know what's going to happen here. You on one hand, you clearly have a taste for unitary executive theory with the Supreme Court majority, which we saw with the immunity case during the campaign. But then we saw John Roberts this week issue a statement defending the judge in question from Trump's calls for impeachment. So, and Roberts did something similar during the first Trump presidency. So Roberts is clearly sensitive to Trump Trump attacking judges. He definitely has some interest in preserving the power of the judicial branch, even if he does subscribe to some, what I would say, cockamamie unitary executive theories. And so how that all comes down together is an unknown. But Roberts does have a track record of not bowing to Trump in the first Trump presidency. So I would not assume the fix is in here. And the more that Trump does things that seem off the rails, one has to wonder if this is going to influence both Roberts and maybe Amy Coney Barrett, who was kind of a tentative yes on that immunity case, but really tried to narrow its impact. My guess is she's unnerved by all this behavior too, and maybe Kavanaugh is as well. So there's room for Trump to lose this case, and then we'll see how determined Trump is to shred the Constitution.
Yeah. Thank God for ACB. I don't know if you remember, Bill. I was a huge proponent of her. I actually wanted her to be the nominee when Kavanaugh was picked. I wanted her to be Trump's first, or it would have been second, I think, pick. I'm a huge ACB booster, and I think that has proven to be correct. Bill, in terms of public perception, I think that when it comes to the economy, when it comes to rising prices, and when it comes to firing veterans, that's bad politics. That could hurt Trump. Here's where I think it gets dicey. I think if you try to defend the Venezuelan gang members or the Hamas supporting leftist protesters, and you start talking about the rule of law and due process, even though I'm a big defender of these things, from a political standpoint, I think you risk coming across like a bleeding heart liberal and out of touch. So I think that talking about jobs of American jobs being lost because of Elon Musk, that seems to me like a much more of a political winner than defending immigrants from being deported. What do you think?
I'm sorry, can you say it one more time?
I thought I nailed it, but yes. So we've got these two issues. I think that when it comes to talking about rugged Americans who are veterans who are fired by DOGE, that's a political winner. The American public are going to be with you on that. When it comes to complaining about immigrants being deported, possibly gang members, you could talk about the rule of law, you could talk about due process, but I don't think it's going to work with a lot of Americans. I think they may be like, let God sort them out or something.
I think you can get away with almost, I agree with the basic point. Obviously, veterans are more sympathetic to a lot of people than immigrants are.
Much more.
Although some immigrant cases can be very sympathetic depending on the circumstances. Someone's wife being deported is different than someone who had pictures of, Hezbollah in her phone. Fairly or unfairly.
But even in the case of that protester at Columbia University who, is apparently anti-Semitic and all that, like, he's married to an American citizen who's 8 months pregnant. So there's an emotional element to that as well.
Yes. But even when it comes to veterans, and not to say veterans aren't sympathetic figures, because of course they're not, but I think people will excuse a lot of behavior and deprioritize issues if they feel they're getting benefits.
Yeah.
If they're going to the grocery store and their grocery bills were down 20%, hey, that's not so great by the veterans, but whatever, I'm still getting mine. That's not what's happening. So to have story after story of sympathetic people who've done nothing wrong getting the shaft, in a vacuum, cut the government, save money, great, save more money for me. That's different than like mean boss fires people who are then have to go collect unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time that the entire economy is destabilizing, then it seems like these things connect. That your reckless behavior is affecting me negatively.
I don't know if you saw this. There was actually there's a race in, I think it was in Wisconsin, for like attorney general. I forget something, but they're actually using Elon Musk as, they're not running against Trump. They're running against Musk. And I can imagine some of these people who've been fired, if you can get them. I mean, we're seeing a lot of earned media, free media. But imagine an ad where one of these people is, talking to the camera saying, I voted for Trump 3 times. And then he fired me. That could be very compelling, especially, Bill, as you were just pointing out, if it coincides with people who are watching also feeling the pinch, or feeling like they've been maybe just betrayed because they voted to lower grocery prices and that didn't happen. So if you could tie those things together, the personal emotional story of a real person, and then say, like, you might be upset too, maybe you feel betrayed by what's happened, but it really hit my family. Something like that. I wonder how compelling that might be in the midterms.
Well, and we got something big coming down the pike here, which is potential huge Medicaid cuts. And Medicaid does not just affect the poorest of the poor. It's a pretty big program that affects a lot of people in the middle class. And it's not going to be that hard to find sympathetic figures who are going to feel, people just might feel in their own lives, but also see people on TV and say that person is from a similar situation as my kind of situation. And I don't even know if they're going to get that bill passed. It could be another Obamacare repeal situation, another thumbs down situation. The margin in the House is so narrow. No, you also
tell me about this, because I've heard recently Musk has been hinting that we need to reform or cut. I think in his case, he's not even saying reform, cut entitlements.
Yeah.
But Trump has always been very smart about not doing that. Like, even though frankly we need to reform them, he's been very smart about not touching that rail. What's happening? What is this?
Well, there's all sorts of that Musk is doing with Social Security, which seems extremely dangerous. But that is sort of a separate. But that's just sort of Musk behaving on its own. That's not about legislation.
I don't think he said maybe someone else mentioned Social Security, and then he said we may need to cut entitlements or something.
Yeah, he's made an indication, which has not been Trump's message. But Trump usually talks about protecting Social Security and Medicare. He's never been as firm about Medicaid, I don't believe. Okay. But I haven't gone back and looked over the whole train. He might have said Medicaid positive.
So Medicaid would be maybe not as risky because it's perceived to be for poor people, not for the.
They may be thinking like that. Look, okay. The Republicans passed a budget resolution. A budget resolution is not law, but it is a precursor to a budget reconciliation bill, which would become law. Budget resolution is meant to be kind of a guideline for your appropriations bills, but through this procedural quirk, you can pass a bill through budget reconciliation that is filibuster proof, but it has to be related to the budget, and you create your instructions for budget reconciliation in your budget resolution. In those instructions, they said, "Hey, House, I think it's the House Commerce Committee. I think it's Energy and Commerce. You got to cut $880 billion. And the only way you get to that in the types of programs that committee is responsible for is Medicaid. There's no other way to get to that number besides Medicaid. So maybe they flinch and they just don't go that high. But that's what the instructions say. So they're on very thin ice. You can pursue cost savings in programs that don't cut people's benefits. And both sides have demagogued this in the past. You try to save money in Medicare by reducing healthcare costs. That's not going to hurt the customer. if the procedure they're getting is just cheaper, the fact that the government saves money doesn't take something out of the hands of the voter. But you can do this in a ham-fisted way that just takes the money out of the program, and then you get less things covered. That's more politically damaging and substantively terrible. That kind of Medicaid cut is so large, I don't see how you do that without negatively affecting people. And they only got to lose a few votes. I mean, the numbers keep shifting because a couple of Democrats died recently in the House. So I don't even know what the exact number it is.
Yeah.
And attendance is going to matter. So what precisely they need to pass the bill is inherently fuzzy. But it's not going to take that many Republicans saying this is too much. I'm going to lose my seat if I vote for this. And this time I write about, for my Friday column, I mean, this is the next order of business for Congress. There's not a whole lot in the legislative pipeline here. And while this is going to be a party line bill, if it passes, it's not going to pass with Democratic help, most likely. Democrats have a role to play in trying to block it if they can convince a few Republicans to not play along. And what's going to make them be convinced? Trump's numbers going through the floor and numbers for this bill and the Medicaid provision going through the floor. And so there are things that they can do rhetorically to help that along. And attacking Chuck Schumer isn't one of them. So if you really are trying to focus on the next order of business, it's hammering Trump, hammering the Medicaid cuts, getting unified around that, and dividing the Republicans, not being divided yourself.
All right. Check out Bill's stuff at Washington Monthly. Check me out at The Hill and the LA Times. Follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show. Bill, any final thoughts?
Check out the new Washington Monthly. The print issue is coming out in full online on Monday. We rolled out the cover package this past Monday, so you can see that online right now. With the focus on this trend of abundance liberalism. You have a new book out by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson called Abundance.
Stuff.
And I'm not involved in this directly. This was written by the cover piece written by the editor-in-chief Paul Glastris and one of our other editors, Nate Weisberg. And they have a nuanced criticism of the abundance liberal agenda, such as it is. I won't summarize it here. I won't give it proper justice, but you can check that out at thewashingtonmonthly.com or pick up the print issue at your local newsstand.
Wow. I've been watching Dodgers Cubs at 6 a.m. with my son, my youngest boy, who's a Dodgers and Orioles fan, and watching White Lotus with the wife. And man, you watched that though?
So no spoilers for me. We're still we're in the middle of episode 3.
I will not spoil, but trust me, stay off Twitter. I must have made the mistake one day of tweeting about White Lotus, and so it's now in my feed. So Monday mornings, I actually had something spoiled. I won't do that to you. Okay. Another great episode, Bill. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Great to talk to you. Take care.
All right. See ya.